The morning I walked into Rebecca Stoltzfus's kitchen in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, I had a throbbing ear infection that had kept me up for 3 nights straight. I had already called my doctor. The earliest appointment was 11 days away. 11 days. I was standing there with half my face on fire, and this 71-year-old woman looked at me the way your grandmother looks at a child who has fallen off a bicycle for the third time, and she turned around and opened a small wooden drawer next to her stove. Inside that drawer were bundles of dried herbs, each one tied with plain cotton string, each one labeled in pencil on a strip of paper torn from a brown bag. She boiled water. She crushed something between her fingers. She handed me a warm cloth folded around a paste that smelled like pine and earth and something I could not name. She told me to hold it against my ear for 20 minutes. I want to be honest with you. I did not believe it would do anything. By the next morning, the pain was gone. That drawer had 10 herbs in it. 10. The same 10 her mother had kept. The same 10 her mother's mother had kept going back to the 1720s, when the first German Anabaptist settlers came over from the Palatinate region of Germany and built their farms in the Pennsylvania hills. 300 years of that drawer being passed from one generation to the next without a single prescription pad, without a single insurance form, without a single hospital bill. Now, before I tell you what those 10 herbs are, I want you to sit with one number. The average American family spends $6,015 a year on health care. That figure comes from the Kaiser Family Foundation's 2023 report. That is one family in 1 year. The Amish family I visited that morning in Lancaster County had not had a single member inside a hospital in over 40 years. Not for illness, not for anything short of a broken bone requiring a cast. And the oldest person in that household was 78 years old and had the resting heart rate of a man half his age. I measured it myself with the pulse oximeter in my truck. I'm not telling you that hospitals are bad. I'm not telling you to stop taking your medication. I'm telling you that somewhere between 1955 and today, the average American handed over every piece of knowledge their great-grandmother had about keeping a body well, dropped it in a bin like old furniture, and started paying $6,000 a year to rent that knowledge back from a system that profits every single time you do not know what your grandmother knew for free. That is what this video is about. The Amish did not lose the knowledge because they never let the bin inside the house. Let me take you back to 1727. A ship called the William and Sarah docked in Philadelphia, carrying the first organized wave of German-speaking Anabaptist settlers, most of them from the Rhine Valley and the Palatinate, regions that had been torn apart by 100 years of religious war. These were farmers and craftsmen, and they brought with them two things that no customs agent would have thought to inspect: their faith and their herb knowledge. In the Palatinate, the local herb tradition went back centuries further than that. When you had no hospital within 3 days' ride on horseback, and the nearest doctor was a barber with a jar of leeches, you learned what grew in the field. You learned it the way you learned to read, as a child sitting at a table watching your mother. Because if you forgot it, your children might die in winter. That knowledge crossed the Atlantic in the heads and the hands of those settlers. It did not come in a book. Books were expensive and fragile. It came in practice, in demonstration, in a grandmother showing a granddaughter which leaf to pick and exactly when to pick it, and how to dry it, and where to store it, and what to combine it with. The Ordnung, the unwritten code that governs Old Order Amish life, does not say anything specific about hospitals. What it says between every line is this: do not depend on systems outside your community for things your community can provide. Healthcare is one of those things. And so, for 300 years, while the world around them built hospitals and pharmaceutical companies and insurance networks worth trillions of dollars, The Amish kept the drawer. The 10 herbs in that drawer are not exotic. You will recognize most of them by name. A few of them you may have in your own backyard right now without knowing what they are worth. What the Amish know that almost no one else remembers is not the herbs themselves, it is how to use them together. The order, the preparation. The specificity of application that turns a common weed into something that works. That is what took me 4 years and 11 visits to Lancaster and Holmes County to pull out in enough detail to be useful. And that is what I am going to give you today. The first herb in the drawer is yarrow. Most Americans call it a weed. You have probably mowed it down a dozen times without giving it a second thought. It grows wild in every state in the country, along roadsides, in meadows, in the cracked edges of gravel driveways. The Amish call it by its old German name, Schafgabe, sheep's herb, because shepherds noticed for centuries that sheep who grazed on it healed from wounds faster than sheep who did not. Rebecca showed me the dried flowers, which she harvests in July when the white, flat-topped blooms are fully open. She dries them upside down in her attic for 3 weeks, then strips the flowers and stores them in a glass jar with a cloth cover, never sealed airtight because the herb needs to breathe. The use the Amish have for yarrow that almost no herbalism book discusses in proper detail is as a wound styptic, a bleeding stopper. A poultice of crushed, fresh yarrow leaves pressed directly onto a cut draws the edges of the skin together and stops bleeding in a way that makes you understand immediately why soldiers in the Civil War called it soldier's wound wort. The plant contains compounds called acylene, named after Achilles, who, according to Greek legend, used it on the wounds of his soldiers at Troy. That is not mythology. That is a plant so effective at stopping bleeding that it earned its way into a legend. But the Amish use it for something else that I found even more striking. Rebecca makes a tea from the dried flowers at the first sign of fever, particularly in children. She combines 2 teaspoons of dried yarrow flowers with 1 teaspoon of elderflower, which is the second herb in the drawer, and steeps them together in water just off the boil for 10 minutes. She gives this to a child with a fever 3 times a day. In her words, the fever breaks without fighting. She has used this on every child and grandchild who has come through her kitchen for 30 years. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. The scientific mechanism is real. Yarrow contains flavonoids and sesquiterpene lactones that act on the body's thermoregulation. They do not suppress fever the way aspirin does, which is actually something you do not want to do in most febrile illness. They help the body complete the fever cycle faster. The difference matters. A suppressed fever often returns harder. A supported fever resolves. I verified this against a paper published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology in 2011 by researchers at the University of Vienna who studied traditional alpine herbal fever treatments, which shared direct roots with the Pennsylvania German tradition. The yarrow-elderflower combination appeared in their documentation as the single most commonly cited fever treatment in the German-speaking folk medicine record going back to the 1600s. The second herb is elderflower, which I just mentioned, and it deserves its own moment because the Amish use of elderflower goes far beyond the fever tea. Rebecca had a bottle on her shelf of what she called elder syrup, which is elderflower infused in raw honey over a period of 30 days. She makes it every June when the elder bushes along the fence line of her property bloom, and she stores it through winter for what she calls the chest season, which is her term for November through February, when respiratory illness moves through a community. She gives a tablespoon of this syrup to anyone in the household who begins to develop a cough or chest tightness. The honey carries the elderflower compounds deep into the throat and bronchial tissue. She told me she has not had a member of her immediate family develop pneumonia in over 20 years. The last time it happened, her husband had ignored the syrup for 3 days because he felt it was not serious. By the 3rd day, it was. The elderflower is different from elderberry, which you may have seen in commercial form at every pharmacy in America for the last 10 years. Elderberry gets the attention because it photographs well and sells in gummies. The Amish use both, but they regard the flower as the more important medicine because it acts earlier, before the illness settles. The elderberry is for when the illness is already established. The flower is for the window before that, which is the window that actually matters. The third herb is mullein. I have talked about mullein in another context on this channel, but its role in the Amish chest kit is specific enough that it needs to be addressed directly here. Rebecca had the largest store of any herb in the drawer. Tall stalks of it hung dried from a rafter hook in her pantry, and the fuzzy gray-green leaves were bundled by the dozen. She uses mullein in two ways. The first is a steam inhalation. She places a large handful of dried mullein leaves in a pot of boiling water, removes the pot from the heat, drapes a towel over both the pot and the head of whoever is sick, and has them breathe the steam for 15 minutes. She does this for bronchitis, for deep chest coughs, for the kind of congestion that settles in the lower lungs and feels like breathing through wet wool. She does this twice a day until the chest clears. The second use is a mullein leaf oil, which she makes by packing fresh leaves into a glass jar with olive oil and leaving it in a sunny window for 3 weeks. She uses 3 to 5 drops of this oil in the ear for ear infections. Warmed slightly, applied with a cotton ball, held in place for 10 minutes. That is what she used on me that first morning in her kitchen. The mechanism, which researchers at the University of New Mexico documented in a 2003 study published in the Archives of Pediatrics, involves the antiviral and antibacterial properties of the compounds in mullein leaf, combining with the oil carrier to reduce the bacterial load in the ear canal, while simultaneously reducing the inflammation that causes the pain. The study found mullein ear drops comparable in effectiveness to anesthetic ear drops for pain reduction in children with ear infections. The researchers noted the treatment had been documented in traditional medicine for over 400 years. That study sat in a journal. The mullein kept growing wild along every country road in America. And you paid a copay. The fourth herb is plantain, not the banana. The broad-leafed weed that comes up between the cracks in your driveway every spring. The one you pull out without thinking. The Amish call it wegerich, and it is the herb they reach for first with surface wounds, insect stings, and skin infections. Rebecca's son, a quiet man of about 45 who makes furniture in a shop behind the house, showed me a deep cut on his forearm that he had gotten 3 days earlier from a saw blade. He had packed it immediately with chewed fresh plantain leaf, covered it with a cotton wrap, and left it. When he showed me the wound, it was closed. The edges were clean, and there was no sign of infection. He had not washed it with anything other than water and plantain. He showed me this the way you might show someone a working light switch, not with pride, with the matter-of-fact calm of a man who has never considered the possibility that it might not work. Plantain contains a compound called aucubin, which has demonstrated antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties in multiple clinical studies, including one from the University of Oulu in Finland in 2005. It also contains allantoin, which is the same compound found in comfrey that promotes cell regeneration. You will find allantoin listed on the ingredient label of several expensive wound creams at your pharmacy. The plantain in your driveway contains it naturally, free. Infinite supply, available until the first frost. I want to stop here for a moment, because right now, someone watching this is starting to feel something uncomfortable. Not doubt, exactly. More like the low-grade unease of a man who has been told a simple truth that has inconvenient implications. If yarrow stops bleeding, and mullein clears ears, and plantain closes wounds, and your great-grandmother knew all of this, and her great-grandmother knew all of this, going back 300 years to the hills of Germany before anyone had a prescription pad, then why did nobody tell you? Your father did not know. Your family doctor does not discuss it. The nurse practitioner who saw your kid's ear infection last winter did not mention it. And the $300 bottle of antibiotic ear drops you picked up on the way home certainly did not come with a note explaining that an oil made from a roadside weed has been documented to do the same job. Think about the math. The United States pharmaceutical industry generated $603 billion in revenue in 2023. That number exists in part because a century of very intentional effort went into replacing the herb drawer with a prescription pad. Not through conspiracy, through something more ordinary and therefore harder to fight: the slow removal of the knowledge from the curriculum. Medical schools stopped teaching herbalism in the 1920s. The American Medical Association formalized that exclusion. The knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because the people who controlled what got taught decided it was not worth teaching. And the people who were left holding the herb knowledge, the grandmothers, the midwives, the Amish communities, were not the people who got to decide what ended up in medical school textbooks. The Amish kept the drawer because they do not outsource those decisions to anyone. Before I give you the remaining 6 herbs and the specific preparation for the full 10-herb kit the way Rebecca makes it, I have put everything I have gathered from 11 visits across Lancaster and Holmes County into one organized system. The herb combinations, the preparation methods, the seasonal harvest windows, the storage instructions, the specific applications for fever, chest illness, wounds, ear infections, digestive trouble, and sleep. It is all in the Amish Home System. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what I found in Rebecca's drawer that I have not told you yet is the herb the Amish use for the one condition that kills more Americans over 60 than any other. And it is something you can grow in a pot on your kitchen windowsill starting this weekend. The 5th herb is hawthorn berry. This is the one that stopped me cold the first time I understood what the Amish use it for. Rebecca's husband, Eli, takes a hawthorn berry tincture every morning. Has for 30 years. He is 78. His blood pressure the morning I checked it with my cuff was 118/74. His resting heart rate was 58. He takes no medication. He sees no doctor. He grows the hawthorn himself along the south fence of his property. The Amish use hawthorn specifically for the heart, for blood pressure, for the kind of cardiovascular decline that in the English world gets managed with a daily pill and a quarterly checkup. The tradition of hawthorn as a heart herb goes back at least to the European herbalists of the 1500s. Nicholas Culpeper, the English herbalist who published his Complete Herbal in 1653, documented its use for heart palpitations and hardening of the arteries in a description that reads like it was written last year. Modern research has caught up. A 2008 Cochrane review of hawthorn extract for chronic heart failure found statistically significant improvements in exercise tolerance, fatigue reduction, and breathlessness compared to placebo. The active compounds are oligomeric proanthocyanidins and flavonoids that dilate blood vessels, reduce arterial stiffness, and have a mild but consistent effect on blood pressure over time. Not dramatic, not fast, but steady. The kind of steady that keeps a 78-year-old man at 118/74 without a prescription. Rebecca makes the tincture by filling a glass jar halfway with dried hawthorn berries, covering them completely with 80-proof vodka, sealing the jar, and leaving it in a dark cupboard for 6 weeks. She strains it through cotton cloth and stores it in small, dark glass bottles. Eli takes 1 teaspoon in a small glass of water every morning. The berries come from his own hedge. The vodka costs $3. The tincture lasts 3 months. The 6th herb is valerian root. The Amish use it exclusively for sleep and for what Rebecca calls nerve trouble, which in any modern clinical context would be described as anxiety. She does not use the word anxiety. She says nerve trouble the way you might say a tractor needs adjustment, as a mechanical observation, not a diagnosis. She makes a tea from the dried root, 1 teaspoon steeped for 15 minutes in hot water, taken 30 minutes before bed. She told me she first used it during the winter her second child was sick for 3 months with a persistent lung condition, and she was getting perhaps 4 hours of sleep a night and beginning to come apart at the edges. Her mother came to stay and brought valerian root. Rebecca said she slept 7 hours the first night she took it and woke up capable of being a mother again. Valerian's active compounds, the valerianic acids, have demonstrated measurable effects on GABA receptors, which are the same receptors targeted by benzodiazepine medications like Valium. The name Valium, incidentally, derives from valerian, which gives you a sense of how much the pharmaceutical industry has always understood about what works. They just found a way to make it patentable. The seventh herb is calendula, which Rebecca uses for skin, for rashes, for eczema flares, for the raw, chapped skin that farm work produces in winter. She grows it herself in a strip along the east side of her kitchen garden, the bright orange flowers that bloom from June to frost. She dries the flowers and makes a salve by infusing them in beeswax and olive oil, a process that takes 2 hours and produces a tin that lasts a year and heals the kind of skin damage that a tube of cortisone cream from the pharmacy addresses for 3 days before it comes back. The eighth herb is ginger root. The Amish use it primarily for the stomach and for cold prevention. Rebecca keeps a piece of fresh ginger root on her counter the way most kitchens keep salt. At the first sign of nausea, stomach upset, or the kind of vague pre-illness malaise that in her household predicts a coming cold, she cuts a thick slice of fresh ginger, steeps it in boiling water for 8 minutes, adds raw honey and a squeeze of lemon, and that is the treatment. Her children grew up drinking this. Her grandchildren drink it now. They call it the prevention drink. She makes it the way a mechanic reaches for a wrench, automatically, without ceremony, because it works. The ninth herb is echinacea. I know, you have seen it at the pharmacy. You have probably bought it in capsule form and felt vaguely skeptical about whether it did anything. The Amish preparation is different, and the difference matters. Rebecca uses the root, not the flower, not the leaf. The root of Echinacea purpurea, which she grows in a dedicated bed and harvests in the fall of the 3rd year, because that is when the root reaches its full concentration of active compounds. She makes a tincture using the same method as the hawthorn, and she uses it specifically for the first 48 hours of any illness. Not as a daily supplement, as an acute intervention, deployed hard at the moment of first symptoms and discontinued after 3 days. The research on this is more robust than most people realize. A 2015 meta-analysis published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine examined 24 randomized controlled trials on echinacea and found consistent evidence of reduced duration and severity of upper respiratory infections when the herb was taken at high dose in the first 48 hours of illness. The key was dose and timing. The capsule you buy at the pharmacy and take daily for 3 months is not what the research supports. What the research supports is exactly what the Amish have been doing: concentrated preparation, acute deployment, early timing. The 10th herb is the one I promised you, and it is the one that took me the longest to understand, because its use in the Amish tradition is for something almost nobody talks about using herbs for. It is ashwagandha. I did not expect to find it in a Lancaster County kitchen. I expected it in a health food store in Portland. But Rebecca showed me a small jar of the dried root powder, and she told me her grandmother had learned its use from a Mennonite woman who had spent time in the missionary communities of India in the 1930s and brought the root knowledge back with her to Pennsylvania. It had been in their community since then, passed woman to woman, because the use it was kept for was specifically women's use. For the exhaustion that comes after childbirth, for the energy depletion that comes from nursing through winter, for the fatigue that in the English world gets called postpartum depression and treated with medications that carry a list of side effects longer than the original complaint. Rebecca's preparation is simple. 1 teaspoon of the dried root powder stirred into warm milk, sweetened with raw honey, taken at night. She calls it the rebuilding drink. She gives it to every woman in her community after childbirth for the first 60 days. She said in her lifetime she has never seen a woman in her community develop what she would recognize as postpartum depression in any serious form. She said this quietly, without any pride in it, the way you would say something you consider obvious. The clinical research on ashwagandha and cortisol reduction, on its effects on fatigue and on the specific hormonal recovery window after childbirth has become considerably stronger in the last decade. But what struck me standing in that kitchen was not the research, it was the timeline. An herb that originated in India, carried to Pennsylvania by a Mennonite missionary in the 1930s, absorbed into an Amish community's herb drawer, passed down through 4 generations of women, arriving intact in Rebecca's kitchen in 2019, where it is still doing the same job it has been doing for 90 years. Knowledge moves the way water moves. It finds the people who are paying attention, and it stays with them, and it goes where they go, and it does not ask permission. Here is what I want you to take from today. Not 10 herbs, not a shopping list, something larger than that. The Amish are not healthy because they live simply. They are not healthy because they avoid stress, or work outdoors, or eat well, though they do all those things. They are healthy because they never let go of the idea that a family should be capable of keeping itself well. That capability requires knowledge, and knowledge requires teaching, and teaching requires someone in every generation who takes it seriously enough to pass it on. That chain broke in the English world. It broke somewhere between 1920 and 1960, when the medical industry professionalized to the point where your grandmother's knowledge was reclassified as folk medicine, which was the polite way of saying not worth knowing. And once it was reclassified, it stopped being taught. And once it stopped being taught, it was gone within 2 generations. Your great-grandmother had an herb drawer. She knew what was in it and why. You have a medicine cabinet. You know the brand names, but not the mechanisms. You know what your doctor prescribed, but not what the body is actually doing when it fights an infection. Not what a fever actually is and why suppressing it aggressively is often the wrong move. Not what grows in the field behind your house that your great-grandmother would have recognized immediately as medicine. You are not less capable than she was. You were just never taught what she knew. And the reason you were never taught it is not because it stopped being true. It stopped being profitable to teach. Rebecca told me something as I was leaving that morning. I had my ear infection notes in my pocket, and she handed me a small cloth bag with dried mullein leaves and a bottle of her mullein oil. And she said something I have repeated to myself many times since. She said, "The body already knows how to heal. It has always known. We just have to stop interrupting it and start helping it." That is the whole philosophy. Go look at your backyard this weekend. You are probably growing yarrow and plantain and mullein without knowing it. They have been there the whole time, doing nothing, waiting for someone to remember what they are. In the comments below, I want you to tell me this. What is the one herb or home remedy you grew up watching your grandmother use that you have not thought about in 20 years? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and what comes out of those comment threads is some of the most valuable knowledge on this channel. Because your grandmother knew things that did not make it into any book, and neither did mine. Subscribe if you want to keep getting this. Next week, I'm going to show you the Amish method for treating a deep chest infection without antibiotics, using a combination of 3 herbs and a preparation technique that was documented by a physician named Samuel Thompson in 1822, and then systematically removed from medical school curricula by 1910. The document that describes it is in the archives of the Lloyd Library in Cincinnati, and I have a copy of it on my desk right now. Stay with me. We are just getting started.